Here's your text, rewritten with the timestamps removed and no additions made. What happens when a seasoned television host decides she's had enough of royal excuses and celebrity privilege? You won't believe what unfolds when Sunny Host comes face-to-face with Prince Harry in what was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about his latest charitable endeavors. The tension that erupted on last night's show has everyone talking, and the explosive confrontation that followed will leave you speechless. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in the most heated exchange we've seen all year. The atmosphere in the studio was electric from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the set. Sunny Host, known for her sharp wit and unwillingness to back down from tough conversations, had clearly done her homework. As the Duke of Sussex settled into his chair, adjusting his suit jacket with that familiar nervous gesture viewers have come to recognize, there was an unmistakable tension crackling in the air. The production team had briefed everyone that this would focus on Harry's recent mental health advocacy and his work with veterans. But Sunny had other plans brewing beneath her professional smile. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us tonight," Sunny began, her voice warm, but carrying an undertone that suggested this wouldn't be the typical celebrity softball interview. "I have to say, it's fascinating to have someone here who's spoken so much about authenticity and truth-telling, especially given some of the recent revelations that have come to light." Harry's posture shifted slightly, his media-trained smile faltering for just a moment. "Well, Sunny, I appreciate being here. I think it's important to have these conversations, especially about mental health and the work we're doing to support veterans who've sacrificed so much." But Sunny wasn't letting him off that easily. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a prosecutor who'd found a crack in the defense. "That's interesting that you mentioned sacrifice, because I think that's exactly what we need to talk about tonight. You've built a brand around being the royal who walked away, the one who chose authenticity over duty. But I have to ask, at what cost to others?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Sunny caught it. She'd been doing this long enough to read the micro-expressions that revealed when someone was about to get defensive. "I'm not sure I follow your question," Harry replied, his British accent seeming to sharpen with tension. "Everything I've done has been about protecting my family and being true to my values." Sunny let out a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Your values. Let's talk about those values, because I've been watching your trajectory very carefully, and I have to say some of the patterns I'm seeing are deeply troubling." The studio audience, which had been murmuring with excitement moments before, fell into an expectant silence. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was about to unfold. Sunny had that look, the same expression she wore when she was about to deliver a legal argument that would dismantle her opponent piece by piece. "You see, Prince Harry, you've positioned yourself as this champion of privacy and mental health, this advocate for authenticity. But every time you claim to want privacy, you sign another multi-million-dollar deal to tell your story. Every time you talk about protecting your family, you throw another family member under the bus in the process." Harry's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, now gripped them tightly. "I think that's a very unfair characterization of what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to break cycles of pain and create a better future for my children." "Break cycles." Sunny's voice rose slightly, skepticism dripping from every word. "Or perpetuate them in a different direction? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've taken the same playbook that you claim to despise, using media manipulation, playing victim, and profiting from family drama, and just pointed it in a different direction." The prince's face flushed slightly, a telltale sign that Sunny's words were hitting their mark. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation entirely. I've been trying to heal, to grow, to become a better person and father. At whose expense? Sunny shot back without missing a beat. Because every interview you give, every documentary you participate in, every book deal you sign seems to come at the expense of family members who can't defend themselves in the same public forum. And now you want to lecture the world about authenticity. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Camera operators adjusted their positions to capture every nuance of the exchange, while the studio audience sat transfixed by the verbal sparring match unfolding before them. This was clearly not going according to anyone's script, least of all Harry's. "I've never claimed to be perfect," Harry said, his voice taking on a defensive edge that sharp-eared viewers would immediately recognize. "But I've been honest about my struggles and my journey." Sunny leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Honest? That's the word you want to use?" "Because I've been doing my research, and there are some very interesting inconsistencies in the various versions of your story that you've told across different platforms and interviews. The prince's media training was clearly kicking in as he tried to maintain his composure, but cracks were beginning to show. I think context is important in any conversation about complex family dynamics and personal growth." "Context," Sunny repeated, her tone making it clear she found the word insufficient. "Let's talk about context, then. The context of a man who grew up with unimaginable privilege, who was given every opportunity, every advantage, and who now makes millions by complaining about how hard his life has been." The studio fell into an almost uncomfortable silence as those words landed. Harry's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, as he processed what had just been said and formulated his response. But Sunny wasn't finished. "And the most troubling part," she continued, her voice gaining momentum like a prosecuting attorney building toward her closing argument, "is that you've wrapped this entire enterprise in the language of social justice and mental health advocacy, as if profiting from family trauma somehow becomes noble when you donate a portion of the proceeds to charity." Harry's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack in earnest now. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried a new edge of irritation. "I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing my motivations and the work that I'm doing." But Sunny was just getting started. And as she prepared to deliver her next verbal assault, it became clear that this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond what anyone in that studio could have anticipated. "Let me ask you something directly." "Prince Harry," Sunny said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "when you decided to write your memoir, when you chose to sit down for those tell-all interviews, did you ever stop to consider the collateral damage? Did you ever think about the people who couldn't fight back?" Harry's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I think everyone has the right to tell their own story, Sunny, and I think it's pretty rich coming from someone who makes a living dissecting other people's lives on television." The audience drew in a collective breath. This was the moment when professional courtesy died and personal animosity took over. Sunny's smile turned razor-sharp. "That's exactly the response I expected," she said, nodding as if Harry had just proven her point. "Deflection. Attack the messenger when you can't defend the message. It's the same playbook every entitled celebrity uses when they're called out on their behavior." "Entitled?" Harry's voice rose for the first time, his carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "You want to talk about entitled? You sit here in your ivory tower, judging people you've never met, making assumptions about situations you know nothing about." Sunny leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "I know what I see, Prince Harry. I see a pattern of behavior that's deeply concerning. You claim to want privacy while simultaneously selling that privacy to the highest bidder. You talk about breaking cycles while perpetuating the exact same behaviors you claim to despise. You don't know what you're talking about," Harry shot back, his accent becoming more pronounced as his agitation grew. You have no idea what it's like to grow up in that environment, to have every aspect of your life scrutinized and controlled. And there it is, Sunny said, triumph evident in her voice. The victim card, right on schedule. Because whenever you're confronted with the consequences of your choices, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? It's the media's fault. It's your family's fault. It's the institution's fault. Never your fault. The studio was electric with tension now. Production assistants were frantically whispering into their headsets, unsure whether to intervene or let this combustible situation continue. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every flash of anger, every moment of this rapidly deteriorating interview. "I've taken responsibility for my mistakes," Harry said through gritted teeth. "But I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who's never walked in my shoes." Sunny laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Walked in your shoes? You mean diamond-encrusted shoes that were handed to you at birth? You want to talk about walking in shoes? Let's talk about the people whose lives you've impacted with your choices. Let's talk about your father dealing with cancer while you're out there selling stories about private family conversations." Harry's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you bring up my father's health? That's completely out of line." "Out of line?" Sunny's voice rose to match his. "You know what's out of line? Profiting from family pain while positioning yourself as some kind of humanitarian hero. You know what's out of line? Using your mother's memory as emotional blackmail every time someone questions your motives." The mention of his mother was clearly the wrong button to push. Harry shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the studio floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent space. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this." But Sunny wasn't backing down. She remained seated, looking up at him with unflinching determination. "Why not? You bring her into everything else. Every interview, every speech, every justification for your behavior. My mother would have wanted this. My mother would have understood that. You've turned her memory into a marketing tool." "That's enough," Harry said, his hands visibly shaking with rage. "I came here in good faith to talk about important issues, and you've turned this into a character assassination." "Good faith?" Sunny stood up now, meeting him at eye level. "Good faith would have been being honest about your motivations from the beginning. Good faith would have been acknowledging the hurt you've caused instead of constantly playing the victim. Good faith would have been having this conversation without your PR team pre-approving every question." "My PR team didn't approve anything," Harry snapped. "And if they had, they would have warned me about walking into an ambush." Sunny's eyes lit up with vindication. "An ambush? Is that what we're calling accountability now? Because from where I stand, this is the first time someone has asked you real questions instead of lobbing you softballs and letting you control the narrative." The confrontation had reached a crescendo that nobody in the studio could have predicted. Two strong-willed personalities, each convinced of their own righteousness, facing off in a battle that had transcended the boundaries of a typical interview. The air itself seemed to crackle with animosity. "You know what your problem is, Sunny?" Harry said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You hide behind the pretense of journalism to justify your cruelty. You tear people down and call it holding them accountable. And you know what your problem is?" Sunny fired back without hesitation. "You've never been held truly accountable for anything in your entire life. So, the moment someone asks you hard questions, you fall apart and start throwing accusations." The studio audience was watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, heads turning back and forth between the two combatants. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared riveted by the raw emotion on display. This was television gold, even if it was rapidly spiraling out of control. "I've been held accountable," Harry insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've acknowledged my mistakes. I've worked to make amends. Have you?" Sunny challenged. "Or have you just found new ways to monetize your trauma while avoiding any real consequences for your actions. Because from where I sit, accountability looks different than million-dollar book deals and Netflix contracts." Harry's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse. But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped, and everyone in that studio could see the anger, the entitlement, and the frustration that he'd been working so hard to keep hidden. "This interview is over," he finally said, though he made no move toward the exit. "Is it?" Sunny asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because we still have 15 minutes left, and I have a lot more questions about the inconsistencies in your various public statements." The challenge hung in the air between them, and it was clear that Harry was at a crossroads. He could walk away and look like he was running from the confrontation, or he could stay and risk further damage to his carefully cultivated image. Either way, Sunny had him exactly where she wanted him, and everyone in that studio could sense that the worst was yet to come. Harry's decision came swift and decisive. Instead of retreating, he stepped closer to Sunny's desk, his eyes blazing with a fury that had been building throughout the entire exchange. "You want to talk about accountability," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Let's talk about your accountability, Sunny. Let's talk about how you've built your career on tearing down people who can't fight back. Let's talk about the lives you've destroyed with your so-called journalism." Sunny didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed energized by his aggression. "Is that a threat, Prince Harry? Because if it is, you're proving my point beautifully. The moment someone challenges you, you resort to intimidation tactics." "It's not a threat," Harry snapped. "It's an observation. You sit here pretending to be some kind of moral authority, but you're nothing more than a glorified gossip columnist with a law degree." The insult landed like a physical blow. Sunny's eyes flashed dangerously, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of her legal training and years of experience dealing with hostile witnesses. "A gossip columnist?" she repeated, her tone deadly calm. "That's rich, coming from someone whose entire post-royal career has been built on gossip. Gossip about your family, gossip about your childhood, gossip about private conversations that should have stayed private. You've turned family secrets into a cottage industry." Harry's composure finally shattered completely. "At least I'm telling my own story instead of picking apart other people's lives for entertainment." "Your own story?" Sunny's voice rose to match his intensity. "Which version? The version you told Oprah? The version in your book? The version you're peddling now? Because they're all different, Harry. And that's the problem. You can't keep your lies straight." "I've never lied," Harry protested. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow and unconvincing. Sunny pounced on the weakness like a predator, sensing wounded prey. "Never lied? What about the story you told about your father cutting you off financially? What about the claims you made about the royal family's response to your mental health struggles? What about the timeline of events you've presented regarding your decision to leave? Because I've done my homework, Prince Harry, and none of it adds up." The studio had become a pressure cooker of tension. Camera operators zoomed in to capture every facial expression, every gesture, every sign of the emotional breakdown that seemed inevitable. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly the most explosive interview confrontation in recent memory. Harry's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or panic, it was impossible to tell. "You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You don't know what really happened." "Then tell me," Sunny challenged, leaning forward like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Tell me the truth. Not the sanitized, PR-approved version. Not the victim narrative you've been selling. Tell me what really happened and why you felt the need to change your story every time you tell it." "I don't owe you anything," Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't owe you explanations or justifications or anything else." "You're right," Sunny agreed, nodding slowly. "You don't owe me anything, But you owe something to all the people who've supported you, who've believed in you, who've defended you when others questioned your motives. Don't you think they deserve the truth? For a moment, something flickered across Harry's face. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "The truth," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want the truth? The truth is that people like you will never be satisfied. No matter what I do, no matter how much I try to make amends or move forward, there will always be someone like you waiting to tear me down for their own benefit." Sunny stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. "People like me? You mean people who ask hard questions? People who don't bow and scrape because you were born into privilege? People who expect you to take real responsibility for your actions? People who profit from other people's pain?" Harry shot back. "People who hide behind righteousness while destroying lives for ratings." The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. Sunny's response was swift and devastating. "You want to talk about profiting from pain? You've made millions selling your family's private moments. You've turned your mother's death, your father's struggles, your brother's relationship into content for your various projects. And you have the audacity to lecture me about ethics." Harry's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally something that looked almost like defeat. But instead of backing down, he seemed to find a reservoir of anger that pushed him past any remaining boundaries of civility. "At least I'm honest about who I am," he said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "I don't pretend to be some kind of journalistic crusader while ambushing people on live television." "Honest?" Sunny's laugh was harsh and mocking. "You wouldn't know honesty if it bit you on your entitled royal behind. You've been lying to yourself and everyone else for so long that I don't think you even remember what the truth looks like anymore." That was the final straw. Harry's face contorted with rage, and he took a step towards Sunny's desk that made several security personnel visibly shift in their positions. "How dare you?" he said, his voice shaking with fury. "How dare you sit there and question my integrity when you spent this entire interview trying to destroy me for ratings?" "I didn't have to try to destroy you," Sunny replied, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. "You've done that perfectly well yourself. I just asked questions. If the answers make you look bad, that's not my fault. That's yours." Harry stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Harry straightened his jacket with sharp, angry movements. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and controlled, but everyone could hear the barely contained fury underneath. "This has been the most unprofessional, biased, and frankly disgusting interview I've ever experienced," he said, his words clipped and precise. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Sunny. This isn't journalism. It's a hatchet job." Sunny remained standing behind her desk, unmoved by his words. "The only thing I'm ashamed of is that it took this long for someone to ask you these questions." Harry's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were trying to formulate one final devastating comeback. But instead, he simply shook his head in apparent disgust. "I'm done," he said, reaching up to remove his microphone with jerky, agitated movements. "This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that I left England to escape, and I refuse to subject myself to it for one more second." He threw the microphone down on his chair with enough force that the sound echoed through the studio speakers. Without another word, he turned and began striding toward the exit, his movements sharp and angry. "Prince Harry." "We still have 8 minutes left," Sunny called after him, but her tone suggested she wasn't particularly disappointed by his departure. Harry paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time. "8 minutes too many," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "Good luck with your career, Sunny. I hope destroying people on television is everything you thought it would be." With that, he disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and an audience that seemed uncertain whether to applaud or sit in shocked silence. Sunny remained standing at her desk, watching his retreat with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Well," she said, turning back to face the cameras with a slight smile, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about Prince Harry's commitment to accountability and honest conversation." We'll be right back after this break. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the magnitude of what had just unfolded began to sink in. In less than 30 minutes, one of the most explosive confrontations in television history had played out in real time, leaving everyone involved forever changed by the brutal honesty of what had been revealed.